You're good to go.
Terrific.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I guess one procedural thing. Anya, do you have to make me host so that I could share my screen?
I will do that right now.
And while that's happening, there are a number of people not on mute. If everybody could hit their mute buttons and keep them that way unless you're speaking, that will help with the feedback. Thanks. I'm going to do the same.
Cool.
Right document.
All right. So while Steve is bringing that up, I believe where we left off last time was in the middle of Article 3. And so I believe we're going to pick up from there and then try to do our best to get to, I believe it is 7. So we'll see how well we do in the time frame we've allotted.
I'm not expecting to get to 7.
I don't think so either, but yeah, we can be ambitious, you know, see what happens. So, have any board members submitted any particular amendments in between the time of our last meeting and now that they wanted considered? I don't know if Anya might have that, or Steve might have that too. I'm not sure.
I didn't receive anything, but I also said I was going to distribute updates, and I didn't. You know, the day after our meeting, a child was born in my family, so that kind of interrupted plans. But
just a little bit.
Yeah. But can you see what's on my screen? The edits to the.
Yes, we can see it with the. Yes, that's correct. We can see it with the revisions proposed.
Let me see. These are with the bubbles, and I know last time we didn't want to include that. So let me see if.
Well, I mean, Steve, are these the bubbles of what we've already discussed, or do you have bubbles for stuff that we haven't discussed yet?
Same. So you know, I want to be consistent with how things worked the last time. So let me.
Fair enough.
Let me try to.
And while you're doing that, Ed, Nina, and Joanne have congratulated you and Caroline on the new addition to the family in the chat. All. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you all. I will hopefully hopefully he'll make an appearance at a future bylaws meeting, but I'll let him nap for now. Okay. Let me see.
You'll put him to work eventually. You put him to work eventually for the community. I got it.
There you go. So you see it on my screen?
Yes. If you could zoom in.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Or make it full screen or something, just so that the toolbar doesn't take up the space, and it'll be easy to read everything.
I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay.
How's that for everybody? Anybody have any issues seeing this on the screen if they are following the screen share?
Okay.
Hearing none, I think we're good. Okay.
So I think we left off at 3B2. Basically, we split off this part from 3B1, talking about board member being removed. So I don't know if there was anything to discuss here. Here, what I'll do is I'll go back to what it currently says. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So the text as it currently appears is an appointed member may be removed from the community board for cause which shall include substantial non-attendance at board or committee meetings over a period of 6 months by the borough president or by a majority vote of the community board following a recommendation for removal by the executive committee. And I think the only modifications there were just cleaning up some of the language, making the capitalization being more since we're referring to, since we define the community board as board, it seemed unnecessary to say appointed board member or just a board member. So I don't know if there was anything substantive that we needed to discuss here, or if we could just leave that as is as far as the substance goes.
So in terms of the rest of our committee members, were there any concerns where we left off? I mean, I think we completed it, but obviously we're kind of picking up where we left off. So are there any concerns that haven't been addressed with this particular section for 1 and 2 that we would want to discuss or go over at this point? Let's see if there are any hands.
Alvin has a
I
hand
think,
up.
okay, yes, go ahead, Alvin. Good to see you too.
See you. Appointed board member distinguishes between those we know as board members and the city council ex officio members.
So you want to keep it in so we can't remove a city council person? Is that the idea?
Right.
Okay, fine with me.
That is a very good point. I like that. Thank you very much, Alvin, as always, for catching those key things. Any other comments, proposals related to this section before we move on? All right. Hearing and seeing none. I guess we could go on to number 3, which has to do with the attendance warning letters.
Yeah, so I guess the main question, and forgive me if we covered this last time, I don't remember if we got here, but whether or not we want to keep the warning letter requirement. I think we had spoken about it a little bit. I'm not sure if we reached the ultimate decision. We wanted to keep that in, and because other than that, I think the only other you know what, I think that was it. I think it was just a question of whether we wanted to keep it just because I think in the context of the bylaws, this was something that kind of triggered the original idea that maybe we needed to revisit the bylaws if we potentially wanted to get rid of the warning letter requirement or modify it somehow. So I just wanted to open that up to discussion.
Okay, so yeah, so let's consider doing it this way. Why don't we see if anyone has any specific proposed changes to this section first, and then let's discuss those proposals. And if there are none, then we'll just move on. Maybe that'll help expedite it that way. So are there any proposed changes relating to this section that anyone would like to make at this point in time?
Hands up in this order: Joe, then Glenn, then Nikki.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Joe, go ahead.
Yes, hi guys.
Hi.
I mentioned the last time, and I want to bring it up now, that we had a number of members, specifically Nathan Silberman, and Nat Silberman, who really rarely showed up at the large meetings, but was at virtually every. He was an engineer and architect, and virtually at every meeting for approvals of building permits, and he was absolutely crucial to that process. So the fact that he was not at the larger meetings would not, you wouldn't want to get rid of Nat because of lack of attendance to the larger meetings. And so I think we need to do something that is not so black and white as far as participation goes, because he, as I said, was absolutely crucial to our neighborhood, our buildings, and very frankly, the building of this neighborhood put millions upon millions of dollars in people's pockets and made this neighborhood. So that is the one part of being on the community board that really has tremendous effect. So for his sake alone, I think we need to revisit the wording of that attendance.
Joe, before you unmute yourself, are you just proposing that we strike the section entirely, or are you asking for ideas in how to accommodate that nuance that you're talking about?
Correct. I think the second part, that that I don't think attendance in and of itself should be sufficient to throw somebody off the board.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. We'll go to Glenn next. Go ahead, Glenn.
Hello. Well,
Hello.
two things. I do agree with what Joe is saying, but I think that it's already taken care of because it requires a majority vote of the exec and a recommendation of the executive committee, and the executive committee has the leeway to determine that someone, you know, is enough of a value to not want to kick them off the board just because they miss a few meetings. So I think that's covered in one. And I just want to say that for two, I think we should just leave it alone because if it is possible to ask someone to leave the community board because of non-attendance, then it's important that they get a warning notification prior to actually taking any action. So I think 1 and 2 are fine just the way they are, and I think it already covers Joe's concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Nikki.
If you didn't think it was possible for there to be a third option, no, I remember being at a meeting like when I first joined the board and very naively being one of the people who was like, yes, letters after they missed 2 meetings. So I have seen that was sort of a very simplistic view. So my very specific, my suggestion would be to say that the people will receive a warning letter, but to remove the specificity and just say, like, after they've been absent from a significant number of meetings during the calendar year. And I know that might sound weird, but I'm sorry, Chicho, stop that. The baby's like shaking something. But actually, I always seem to find parallels between the community board and my own job. And we are currently in the process of sending out angry letters to people that have like sort of broken the rules of the organization. So I think it's really important that there be like a paper trail if someone is not performing, because if you do eventually want to remove them for some reason, you do need to have at least warned them that they were doing something wrong. But I also feel it's okay to maybe remove the specificity and leave that up to the judgment of the people involved, right? Like, so that if the person goes, oh, the man that Glenn just mentioned, you know, or sorry, Joe mentioned, like, this guy is super involved. It does not matter that he missed the last 3 larger board meetings. So that's my suggestion, is leave this part in there, just remove the specificity around the exact number and say something like if they've been absent from a significant number of meetings or something like that.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikki. I believe Joanne has her hand up.
Hey, thanks, Jonathan. So I agree with Nikki that we do need to have some kind of mechanism for a warning. But contrary to other members of the board, I think when you accept an appointment to a board, you accept a commitment of going to the general meetings. And if you're very active at public hearings, that's great. But then if we have questions for you about the public hearing at a general meeting and you're not present, then you're really not fulfilling your duties. So, you know, with regards to how many meetings, I think you do need to have some kind of, you need to meet people in the, you know, where they're at and let them know what the expectations are in the bylaws. If you're going to say 2 consecutive board meetings, then, you know, you've managed their expectations. But, you know, I know that when I joined the board, I knew that my attendance was important, and that's actually my expectation for everyone as well.
Thank you very much, Joanne, for that. Any other hands up? Nina, I think I see your hand up. And then I see Sean, so, well, Nina, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I was just trying to get to where I could unmute. Yeah, actually, I was going to say exactly what Joanne said, that I think you can't be vague and you can't pick and choose, because then it becomes very, very unfair. And you can get into all kinds of things. Well, you know, you let this person do this. Now, why are you telling me that, etc. And in fact, I think, well, maybe at this point it was, I don't know, 2 years ago or something. I actually missed one meeting and spoke to the then chair because I was sick, and I think I still got a warning letter just saying, you missed a meeting. And I was thinking like, oh, okay, well, so but anyway, but I think that Joanne's point that you can't be vague and you can't pick and choose, because then you just get into all kinds of trouble with that. If somebody can't attend general meetings, then let them attend those meetings that are of interest to them as a public, whatever public member, et cetera, but not as an actual voting board member.
Thank you for that, Nina. Sean, you have something you want to add, I believe, right?
Thanks. I just want to remind on the few occasions that we have gotten to the task of sending the letters, because we have not on an administrative level been very consistent with this. I want to remind the board that they're pretty gentle letters. I think they were like, gee, we really miss you. And I also maybe would add the word to unexcused absences. So if there is some reason, an illness or something, and you just give us a heads up ahead of time, and we know, that's an excused absence, and maybe that wouldn't pertain. It's just another way of kind of drilling down on it a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Sean. Anybody else have their hand up? Oh, I think Anne, I see your hand up.
Hi, yeah. So the idea of excused versus unexcused, thank you very much, Sean. I was just going to raise that. So I also agree that participation is important. Do I hear from board members present that maybe 2 is too frequent? Would members consider extending that to 3? Because if we're going to put in guardrails, maybe 2 just is a lot more administrative. And we are in an earlier meeting the idea of switching the word shall to may. So I think that the unexcused component addresses that nicely, and of course the tone of the letter as Sean suggested. But would we want to look at that 2 consecutive board meetings and 4 over the calendar year? I mean, 4 to me is fine, but 2 consecutive could be an issue maybe. It may be worthy of consideration to change it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Okay, if I don't see any other, Glenn, go ahead. Yes, I see your hand up.
And I think that it's 2 consecutive requires contact. So by adding unexcused absences, I think it covers the base. If something is happening where a person has to miss 2 or 3 consecutive meetings, but it's a reasonable excuse, then that's fine. I think that just adding the unexcused word in there covers it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. At this point, before I acknowledge any other hands that might be up, it sounds like to me that we might have a consensus about how to address this concern. I think the consensus from everyone's proposals and input is as long as we say that there's a requirement that an excuse be given, which of course then could be evaluated by the chairperson and the executive committee and all in context. But if an excuse is given, that's one thing. And if it's an inexcused absence, if no excuse is given and it's just purely like they disappeared for 2 months straight, or they've disappeared for 4 out of the 10 months that the board is in session, then that would be the prompt for reaching out and communicating, hey, there's a problem here. We need to find out what's going on with you, or we have to follow up further. So would it be acceptable to just put in the words absent without excuse from 2 consecutive board meetings, or absent without excuse from 4 board meetings during the calendar year? And I say that in particular, thinking of what Joe brought up, because I do believe there was a reason why our former board member and colleague wasn't able to make the board meetings regularly, but could make the public hearings. I think I think that's true of other board members who have provided that value add, and there was a reason, there was a conflict, and I don't mean to substitute past for what the current chairperson may prefer, but I think that was a big part of the calculus there. So excused absence might be the best way to define it. So I'm just kind of like, amalgamating what everybody's saying, and I think we've got support for that. So if that's the change on the table, do we want to discuss that further? Or are there other points that we want to discuss in addition to adding absent without excuse from 2 consecutive board meetings, or absent without excuse from 4 board meetings? So that's proposal 1, summing it up, and of course all of you could say if you think that's fair or not.
Well, we can discuss that first. There's 2 other minor things that I wanted to address, but I think that's the main issue here. Oh, also sorry, I think I just got a message from Anya that someone's on the phone. If they could identify themselves.
Call-in user, you can press *6 to unmute. I'll also try to unmute you at this.
Can folks hear me?
Oh, there we go. Who is that?
Hey guys, this is Carl. I just came from fitness, so I'm on the bus. I'm just listening.
Wonderful.
This is 732, and then when I get home, probably around 7:45, then I'll be able to rejoin my laptop and then see you guys. But yeah, I'm the mysterious person behind the 732.
Thank you, Carl. And I will leave you unmuted so that you can participate in the discussion unless it becomes too noisy. And then you can use *6 if you need, but I'll leave you unmuted for now. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you, Anya.
Thanks, Carl. Looking forward to seeing your face later.
Thank you.
Okay, so then, all right, so we have without excuse written down here. Do we want, is there any debate about, any further debate about this particular revision?
If I might, I would like to just add one word, except excuse. Right? Not just any excuse. My excuse is that I was tired and I took a nap. No, acceptable excuse. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other hands up in discussion of this? Anne? Or was that from before?
Jonathan, Joe Dweck.
I believe Anne's speaking, but she's on mute.
Oh, there we go.
Am I on mute?
Yeah, we hear you now.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Mine shows as mute. Okay, sorry. So I'm not sure we want to use the word warning letter. Is that necessary? Could we dial that down a little? Maybe notice letter, and I like the idea of an unexcused as opposed to, because if it isn't or going for a matter, it's not really acceptable. So it wouldn't be excused. So I don't know. I'm not comfortable with the word warning. I think it may be really strong and perhaps not necessary, but I'll leave that up to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Let's see, who do we, Joe, I think you popped on, and then I see Florencia.
I just wanted to thank you, Jonathan. I just wanted to state that some of the previous comments, the Nat Silberman as an example, it wasn't that he was skipping out on our meetings, and the benefit was far, far greater to the community and to the community board that he was on the that he was a part of the board. So it was something that we had gotten benefit of, not he. So I want that to be clear. It's not as if that we're doing a favor for somebody else and excusing him and he's not committed. He was tremendously committed. He worked extremely hard, and without his input, we would have been in sad shape. So I want to be clear about people like that in the future. That's all.
Thank you, Joe. Florencia, I believe your hand was up. I don't know if you still want to speak.
Yeah, I am.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, I was agreeing with what Anne said, and also I think I can't see anyone. So, was that Glenn, or I'm not sure who said it.
Oh, that was just Joe, maybe. Maybe it was Joe.
Okay, about the excuse, having a valid excuse, because you can have emergencies or illnesses. So, yeah. And I wanted to ask you, what number was that you're dealing with? Because I thought I heard 3, but on
It-
my,
it-
I checked on the website and I'm checking my printout and I'm like, isn't that number 2?
It's what is currently B2, but now B3 because we broke B1 into 2 parts.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
it was B2, now it's going to become B3. Thanks for
Okay,
clarifying
thank
that.
you. Thank you. Okay, that's my input.
Thank you very much, Florencia.
Okay.
Okay,
Actually,
so
if I could just weigh in here
take it.
quickly, I really liked Florencia's term of valid excuse. I don't know, to me, valid seems more objective than acceptable. Acceptable sounds like subjective to me, like even though they're kind of getting at the same point. So my preference would be that we use valid excuse instead of acceptable excuse. I was almost tempted to, even ask Joanne if she was comfortable, like being the arbiter of what's an acceptable versus unacceptable excuse. But I think I don't know. To me, valid excuse seems pretty objective. I could be wrong though.
I agree with you on the valid part, and I do think it would be wise if Joanne thinks it's also wise to weigh on it, but we
She
should
does, it's in the
choose.
chat.
Okay, but we also should choose the wording because chair people change over time, so we should make sure that whatever this is, it's not based on a person that we know right now and how they might handle it, but it's also based on a fair way that no matter who is chairperson in the future, that it will be deemed a fair and reliable enough standard that everyone can feel comfortable with. So I do want to consider that too. So if there are no objections to the word valid replacing acceptable from anybody, we could consider the change with that wording, without valid excuse. And again, to just remind everyone, this is in the context of, and not to forget Anne's point about warning letter, but this is in the context of letting people know. And then it's still always going to be reviewed by the executive committee if there's a real issue, and then the executive committee would have to recommend action on removal before it's considered by the board, so or by the borough president. So in that context, whatever the situation is, it will ultimately be reviewed by the executive committee whole, and not just at the discretion of a chairperson decide, oh yeah, we need to get rid of this person, and then the board is going to vote on it by a whim. So just to clarify how it all ties in. So,
but I guess we do. Sorry, Jonathan. I guess we do need to resolve, or we should resolve, Anne's point if we should change the terminology warning letter to something softer like notice.
Yeah. So I mean, what would you propose, Anne? Do you have a specific wording you think is better?
Just say letter. The rest of it is implied in what the rest of the section says. I put that in the chat.
Oh, I mean, that sounds reasonable. Anne, to your point, would that be acceptable?
That's fine. I was thinking notice letter, meaning it's you're giving a notice.
Redundant.
So, but
that's redundant, Anne.
Well, it specifies, but I defer. It's fine.
Okay. Are there any further comments or discussion about these sets of changes, removing the word warning, and then adding without valid excuse as part of the absence, the qualifier? Let me see if there are any hands up. I'm trying to keep track of all this. All right, let's see. I don't see any other hands up.
I have 2 more minor items if we.
Sure, yeah, let's put it. If we're past. Yeah, go ahead, Sika.
To Alvin's point earlier, I thought it would make sense to specify that this provision only goes for appointed board members. I don't think we need to be in the business of sending letters to our city council people. I assume that's not controversial. The other part was at the end. It said from 4 board meetings during the calendar year. I was in another group where the bylaws referred to a calendar year, and I just think it can be a little unclear if you mean like, okay, 2021, or are we talking prior 365 days? So I suggest changing it to prior year, just so, because I think calendar year could invite some confusion. But again, it's a minor point.
Yeah, I'm not going to complicate it. I was just going to say this, but we do not have to do anything with it. Is that technically the board session cuts across calendar years? So, because it's September to June. So, but let's not complicate it. I think
Jonathan,
calendar year is fine.
I think you might wish to complicate it actually, because
Oh.
the borough president's office looks at calendar years for attendance, but our meeting season goes from September to June, so it's 2 different years on the calendar. So I think it's a worthy point of discussion, whether you're talking about, we're really talking about the meeting season, the September through June meeting season. It doesn't matter if you missed June. I'd be really worried if you missed June and then you miss September, but then you've gone to all the meetings before and after that. I don't think so. I think it's within that season.
I mean, is the term for that during the community board year? Like, what's the right term for our September to June period?
Session. It would usually be considered a session.
Yeah.
Joanne has suggested it's
Oh, yes.
appointment year.
That's an interesting way to look at it, because that would be typically somewhere between April and June to the following April and June. But does it really solve a problem? Let's think it out loud. If someone is in a calendar year
Yes,
absent for 4 months, whether it cuts across sessions or not, like that's a substantial amount of meetings that they've missed. That means that they've only come to 6 of the 10 board meetings, and it really doesn't, and when they were appointed, kind of is entailed. We're not going to count months that they may not have been appointed for. So, I don't know if there's a problem here. Anyway, I'm going to throw that out there. Yeah.
I just have a quick question for Sean. So Sean, when you
Sure.
submit your attendance sheets to the borough president, because the borough president will actually have to refer to those attendance sheets if anyone was ever to be recommended for removal, what is the period? Is it January to December? Because then we should really be in line with the borough president.
Well, I don't want to shock anyone, but I think that there's been a little lack of consistency at Borough Hall, and when they used to do the perfect attendance awards, those were within the calendar year. So everybody who attended meetings in 2020 and missed none of them got a perfect attendance award. But when they ask us, when they're doing their appointments and they ask us for the attendance, we tend to give them the September through June attendance. Or if that member got appointed like in mid-year, from that point. So that's hard to answer. Maybe, yeah,
I would just go by appointment, how the borough president is judging fitness through, for appointment, which is, as you said, the September through May attendance sheets. So I think that should be how we gauge someone's attendance to the meetings.
So Sean, is that like a yearly session or just a session?
Well, I think session is thought of as the September through June. I mean, if you go and look at the city charter and it requires all boards to meet September through June, and has July and August off, generally speaking, that would be the session year. And I think Steve is typing it in very clearly. There's just kind of no doubt. I mean, it's certainly what you mean when you say you've been absent from 4 meetings overall. You mean 4 meetings within that time frame. You don't, right? It looks clear to me now the way Steve has written it, September through June session period.
September through June board session. Yeah. Okay. Any
That's
further,
very clear.
any hands raised on that?
Let me take a look. Anne, is your hand up still from before, or do you wish to speak again now? Let's see. Oh, it's down. Okay. I don't think there's any immediate discussion about that. So, so if there are no other proposals to add to this, is that, and now I'm forgetting, Steve, if there was anything else. I think you mentioned yours and you put them down already.
I mentioned in passing the appointed board member, and I assume that wasn't controversial. So, do you want me to read out what as it currently stands, and hopefully we're
Yeah, I
okay with it, and then we'll move on?
Yeah,
Okay.
sounds good,
So-
because I don't see any hands up, so yeah.
So as it currently reads, this is now B3, was formerly B2, the chairperson shall send a letter to any appointed board member after that member has been absent without valid excuse from 2 consecutive board meetings, or after that member has been absent without valid excuse from 4 board meetings during the September through June board session.
Okay, so that would be the wording of the bylaws of that section, if there are no other changes to be made, and that would be what we propose for the board to adopt when we report this out for final approval by the board. Any final comments, discussion on the set of changes and how it reads? I'm hearing none, so I will take it that we are in consensus to recommend that wording be adopted by the full board. All right, let's move on to the next.
So we have what was B3 and now B4. So it currently reads, in addition to absences as set forth herein above, cause for removal shall also be for violation by a member of the provisions of sections D or E of this subdivision as hereinafter set forth. And I smirked a little bit reading this because I feel like there were a lot in this document is meant to be informal, and then suddenly, this particular paragraph, goes all in with set forth herein and hereinafter and all that. So I guess if I had my way, I'd kind of get rid of what I think is unnecessary legalese, but otherwise I think the provision as it is fine. I mean, we haven't gotten to D and E yet, but we'll get there, and those provisions, I guess, kind of have to do. They don't really have to do with. I mean, I guess the D and E deal with issues that, I guess just board member behavior. So I guess in theory they could connect, but, yeah. In any event, I think the substance of the paragraph of that portion is fine. It's just a matter of whether the terminology could be cleaned up.
Thank you, Steve. Let's see if I just for the heck of it, and I see Nikki's hand up. Before I let Nikki speak on this, or recognize her to speak on it. Again, from a holistic standpoint, we should assume that most of what we have is good, because we haven't had massive conflicts relating to enforcement or specifications in our bylaws in the operation of our board. So as we continue to go through it, unless there's something that we envision that should be operating differently that we need to codify, maybe then we propose something. But if basically the method of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, if that could still prove to be true as we go through it, we should aim to leave as much untouched as possible, unless there really is cause to review and scrutinize and modify, just so that way we can expedite the process of getting to the parts of the bylaws where we do really want to do that, and we do feel like we need to do that. So I just want to say that, and now I will let Nikki speak. So go ahead, Nikki.
So I wanted to argue about whether or not we should be compensated, because I'm kidding. No, Steve, on your screen right now, I'm just trying to, there's one paragraph in here that when I gave my feedback in writing, I actually found kind of confusing. I think it's.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Oh,
we're not up to that yet.
Sorry, I was jumping ahead.
When I was referring ahead to sections theory, I just meant in the context of what this lines reference to sections D and E. We're not at those actual sections yet. I know you had a comment, and we'll get there.
Okay, then I'll shut up. I agree with simplifying the language.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Nikki. I think we all agree this is like a job, and but we're compensated by our the reward of our civic impact, I guess, is what we're gonna have to just try to take to the bank, which we'll just have to feel good about it and pat ourselves on the back. Okay. Thank you, Nikki. Anne, you have your hand raised, I believe.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I can't see, the paragraph is not displayed on the screen that's shared. If you could bring that back up. There's just one little comment I'd like to say, and that is where it's, if I could see it, where are we? I can't change this
What's
view.
currently number 4?
Hold
In
on.
addition to absences?
No, down. We're done with absences, correct?
No, that's where we are.
We're on.
No, in addition
We're
to
on
absences, I said,
speaking on behalf of the board as the board if we're in a public forum. I thought we had moved
no, we're
to
not
that.
there yet. No, we're not there yet.
I'll come back. Thank you.
Steve, just to clarify, what was the simplification you wanted to? Is it already in there?
I took it out once you said don't fix it if it ain't broke. I think just taking out like
Oh, well, that's like a editorial simplify. That's fine.
Yeah,
If you want to remove that, that's fine.
These unnecessary legalese. That's all I was proposing taking out. So,
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. That's like editorial. So that's fine.
Yeah.
I didn't mean things like that. I think we should do clean it up. It just looks more professional, and it'll hopefully eliminates any ambiguity that accidentally might arise, which would be good. So,
yeah.
Okay.
And I don't think
So
that's
with-
controversial.
Yeah, I don't think so, and hopefully it won't become controversial. Nikki, your hand is still up. I'm not sure if that you mean to have it up still, unless you do want to speak again. Okay, I'm assuming she does. Okay. Okay, so there's no issue with that little editorial correction. We can move forward with C, which is a statement of obvious fact. Nikki, of course, reinforced for us incontrovertible truth. So I don't think there should be anything more to discuss on that particular section. Or we'll have to take it up with the voters of the city of New York if we want to change that. So a little bit out of scope for us. So, okay, now I guess we'll go to paragraph D and E. And before we get into that, I just want to say, and Alvin, we could, and Sean, I think might be able to, oh, Joe and Glenn too. I think those two were both added in the 2015 revision. Maybe one of them was there already, but definitely I don't think E was there, if I remember correctly. But those were added recently, just so you know, in the last 5-6 years. I think that's correct. So, so are there any discussions or concerns or proposals to, modify D or E here in this section?
How about maybe let's take them one at a time because they're multi-sentences and here let me just go back to the original just so we're clear at what they say. So starting with D, all members shall serve on the board in their capacity as private citizens only. Their actions shall not be instructed by or be responsible to any other organization. Any member participating in the board's consideration of a matter involving self-serving or conflict of interest shall identify such interests and shall declare him/herself as not eligible to vote on such matters.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And yes, good point. So let's, so I see a couple hands are raised. We're just going to talk about if there is anything to propose that ought to be changed in section D. I will, Florencia, go ahead. I see you're already unmuted.
Okay. This is just to go back to C that Nikki talked about. That in the city government, chapter 70, section 2800C, while one may not be compensated, they can be reimbursed for traveling. Okay.
You got a point. You do have a point there. That is true.
Move on to
That's actually
D.
very interesting. I haven't thought about that in many years. That's interesting.
I have.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, there is that whole budget thing for the office that would be impacted by that. But
Yeah. Okay, we can move on.
thank you, thank you for highlighting that little exception clause of sorts. Okay. Oh, Joe put his hand down, so I think we're good to go. So I'm seeing no proposals for section D, although I do think, Steve, you have an editorial revision you want to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think, aside from, board members and capitalizing board, I'm certainly not the expert as far as gender neutral terminology, but I changed him/herself to themself. I'm not sure, and there stuff like that continues further down. I'm not sure if anyone has a counter proposal or anything like that, but I did think, given sensitivity to gender norms these days, it might make sense to at least make some attempt at modifying him/herself, but I defer to other folks.
I got one.
Thoughts.
I also have one other suggestion. We could just change the grammar of it just slightly and say, shall declare that they are not eligible to vote, and do it that way. But I mean, that's just one way to do it grammatically. That kind of covers everything. Joanne put in the chat that themself is okay. I'm just not familiar with that term, but it very well may be a term that is now being used in the singular. I've never seen it in the singular.
It is
before,
definitely
so.
being used in well, it's being used for individuals who are referring to themselves as them, they. I think that if we want to be really steadfast in this, we would have him, her, and them, all of them. But I defer to the board on how much you want to recognize that we're not in a gender binary world anymore.
I'm fine with Jonathan's suggestion. I think that's a clean way to do it. Shall declare they are not eligible to vote on such matters.
I mean, that would be the simplest way grammatically. I do see Nina and Shahid have their hand up. So Nina, go ahead, and then Shahid will be after Nina.
Okay, yeah, I also agree that just by making that little grammar change, we avoid all of that awkwardness, and yet it's still inclusive. So personally, that would be my recommendation. That's all.
Thank you, Nina. Shahid?
Everybody. Yes, actually, I just want to add that regarding section D, that as a private citizen, so whenever we go any program or any press conference or any meeting, so there we also introduce that my name is Shahid Khan and I'm chairman of this organization and I'm also a community board member. So there is no harm to at least introduce yourself as a community board member.
Thank you, Shahid. I do think I think it's important that we talk this point out, but section D is just saying that if you're part of XYZ Civic Association, XYZ Civic Association has said, I'm in favor of this thing, and you are on the board of XYZ Civic Association, then you would vote the way the organization voted. This is saying you're not to do that. You're to vote only as a private citizen. And if you do have a conflict of interest, then you would have to declare yourself not eligible to vote. Just to make it very clear that no one else is responsible to answer to an outside organization when they are a sitting board member. So that's what D is answering. Now, the other point you brought up is in E, and we'll go into E when we finish with D. And then we'll talk about
Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing it up. That's a good point for us to highlight here tonight. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Who else do we have? Oh, Alvin, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Have we established that citizenship is necessary to be a board member?
Private individuals
Are
only.
you just throwing like another an interesting grenade to facilitate more discussion there, Alvin? It's a valid point. I don't know if I don't know what does everyone think there. it's a good point. I don't know what you're supposed to be if you're a board member. That's a good point.
Individuals work, Steve. I think that's a good substitution.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, I think that's a good point. Yeah. Great. Any other proposals for section D that people think are really important to make? Okay. Hearing none and seeing no hands, do you want to just read what the revised version would be that we proposed?
Oh yeah, good idea. Before we skipped to E. Okay, so now it reads, all board members shall serve on the board in their capacity as private individuals only. Their actions shall not be instructed by or be responsible to any other organization. Any board member participating in the board's consideration of a matter involving self-serving or conflict of interest shall identify such interests and shall declare they are not eligible to vote on such matters. That's D.
Okay. Any final comments or issues with that wording before we move on to E? Hearing and seeing none, then we'll propose that wording to the full board, and we'll move on to E. So you want to read out that section, Steve? Sorry.
Yeah. So as it reads before any revisions, any member appearing before a governmental body or otherwise making a public statement which conflicts in any respect with positions adopted by the board shall not identify himself or herself as a member of the board when making such statement. No member shall represent the board's position before any city or other governmental agency or authority unless designated to do so by the board chairperson or the executive committee. And I know Nikki had a reaction to that. I don't know if there are any other hands, but certainly added a comment in her version of the document that she submitted.
Okay, so let's first, maybe because this is an important point, and especially because Shahid brought it up as well. Just high level, does anyone want to ask questions about what this means or the implications of it as it's currently written? And it's been in the bylaws for the last 6 years. Just to clarify the nature and meaning of it. And raise your hand if you have a question about it. I think I see. Okay, I'm confused now. Let me see. Hands have changed quickly. Joe, why don't you go?
Clarify that where this came from, that we had previous board members that would announce in different venues, whether it be public, whether it be the press, that they are on the community board, without saying that they are not representing the community board. That is the difficulty that we have. That if somebody goes into any kind of meeting, whether it be a synagogue or whatever it might be, and say, I'm on the community board and I think so and so, but you have to specify that you are not representing the community board. That is the issue. That when you're a community board member, you are acting on behalf of the community on the board. Outside of the board, you are not acting on behalf of the community board, and that is what was trying to be communicated for here and in the future.
Thank you, Joe. I do want to highlight though the wording here, and there is some nuance here, and I think this is definitely a big issue for our board members because we tend to wear a bunch of hats in our civic life. There are two things that are happening here. One is almost to the point that Joe made, which is in the second sentence. It's saying you can't say that you are representing the board without official authorization by the board to do so. So even if you're a board member and you're going to state the board's official position, you can't say that you're doing that unless the chair or the executive committee have asked you and designated you to do that formally in writing, whatever the case may be. The first sentence there, this is probably where it gets a little hairy, is it's saying very clearly, if you're going to identify yourself as a board member when speaking in front of a governmental body or to the press or in any other public venue, and if you're going to say something that is contrary to what the board has officially approved, then you should not identify yourself as a board member. You should not ever make the statement that, though it has been adjudicated before the community board, that you should not say that you're a board member and then say, I completely and totally disagree with what the majority of the board adopted, and saying that as a board member and identifying yourself publicly as a board member. It's a really tricky nuance, but that's what this section is saying. Whether that's a good idea, a bad idea, whether that's something we need to reform, different conversation. But to clarify, that's what that particular sentence means. That you cannot say something contrary to what the board has adopted if you're going to identify yourself before that body as a board member. The second sentence is saying you just don't identify yourself as representing the board unless the board has officially designated you to represent the board. So that's, I just want to clarify those points, and then let's go ahead and entertain whatever discussion might be coming up. So I think Nikki, so let me just ask, Joe, I see your hand up still, and I see Shahid, your hand is up still. I don't know if you both have meant to keep your hand up. I'm just trying to judge it here. I do see Nikki, his hand is up, so I'm going to let Nikki go, and then
I
if
lowered
you...
my hand, John.
Okay, great. It's taking a little time for it to come through, apparently. Okay, Nikki, go ahead, and then we'll see who else.
So I'm repeating in many ways my written commentary, but my suggestion would be to say, I feel like there's like 17 things going on in this. And I think it's very normal for an organization to have rules that say you cannot represent the organization unless you've been given explicit permission to do so. And for me, I think we definitely need a clause like that. But then this goes a little bit beyond that, and I would personally advocate for removing it. So what I would suggest would be to revise E so that it says, any member making a public statement must make it clear that they do not represent the board's position unless designated to do so by the board chairperson or the executive committee. Because then that's just a blanket thing about you're not allowed to represent the board unless you've been given permission to do that. I think having the very specific stuff about a governmental body isn't helpful. It's too narrow. And then I personally believe that saying that I can't, like Shahid said before, of course you need to be allowed to identify yourself as a board member. I mean, it's on your resume, whatever. So, you know, that's just a fact. The fact, you know, I think you need to be able to say that. But I personally do not like being told that I can't disagree with the board's decisions. The Supreme Court of the United States allows justices to publicly disagree with the group's decision. So I find that clause, that's up to the group to come to some sort of consensus on. But speaking for myself personally, I find that problematic.
Thank you very much for that, Nikki. Are there other hands relating to this topic? Anyone else wants to speak? Oh, Anne, are you waving your hand? Okay, go ahead, Anne.
Okay.
Or no? Or maybe not. Florencia, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say, well, I agree with the suggestion that Nikki made. I just thought that this meant that you know, whenever you go to an event or like you're in front of the press, to say you're representing the board when you're giving your opinion or, you know, stating your whatever you're saying to that body, not to say like on behalf of Community Board 14. You're speaking on behalf of the board. But it's different if you say I'm a member of the board, but I am speaking, this is my personal take on this. I think that is different. So maybe it does need to clarify.
So thank you, Florencia, because yeah, to your point, this is saying you cannot publicly speak about something the board has already adopted if you're in conflict with it. And you can't identify yourself even as a board member when making it. You could say I'm a regular person who's a resident, but you can't specify your affiliation with the community board if you're going to make a statement in conflict with a position the board has adopted. That's what that phrasing literally means, as it is here. And again, I mean, anyone who was there back in the last revisions, if they, if I'm misunderstanding that, but I mean, I think it's plain to me what the wording means. And so I just want to clarify that. So It sounds like there's a proposal of some kind to maybe alter this or strike it entirely. I don't know what the nature of it is at the moment. Are there any other hands up that want to speak?
And
And you
Yes.
keep muting yourself when you speak. I think that's what happens. So now you're
Okay.
good. We hear you now.
Okay. So mine shows mute right now. Sorry about that. So I'm curious, would it be helpful to not only, I personally view this as along the lines, I would endorse this language more along the lines of what Florencia had said. But the reason I'm chiming in now is to ask if it would be helpful to tie this section back to the duties of the chair, section F and G, which is that the chair represents and stands for the board in all necessary actions and so forth. You know, F and G speaks to the fact that they are the official representative of the board. I imagine the district manager could as well, but they work hand in hand. But that's part of the chair's duty. So pursuant to that. Thank you.
So Anne, just to clarify, so you're suggesting that possibly it is unnecessary to state entirely that this is grounds for removal? Because if you do something directly in conflict with the chair's responsibilities in the bylaws, clearly you've already broken the rules. So is that the point that you're trying to make?
Well, I see it. My concern with the section is, or my view of the section speaks to the fact that likely you've had members who have spoken publicly by identifying themselves as board members and then giving their opinion, allowing it to sort of be awash with the board position. And I agree that if that's the case, then it needs clarification. But other members here, Nikki, Florencia, have made really good points about what you're, you can say what you want as a private citizen, right? And it is not a secret who is on the board. It's listed, it's in the public domain. So to divorce your ability to, it's not the idea of identifying yourself as a board member. To me, it's more constricting your ability to conflate your personal opinion with the opinion of the board. And the board chair, and maybe later in the district manager section, those are the two, unless they appoint or assign it to somebody else. So it sounds to me like this has been an issue, so it should be addressed. But it may be helpful to build going forward to clarify it, but predicate it on the earlier section or tie it back in. I leave that up to you. I'm just saying that it is clarified in the other, but there are rights, there are freedom of speech rights here that we can't really abridge, is my thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. I think because Nikki did propose a set of changes in writing, let's just review what the proposed changes are. Steve, do you have it in there already? I think you do.
You know, well, Nikki's,
Or no?
I forget, and I think Nikki commented. Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you made direct edits to the section.
I think I
She did
just
post something in the
commented. I
chat.
was like, because I thought this was such an odd clause that I actually doubted that I was reading it correctly. I was like, wait, is that saying that I can't say it only if I disagree? So that was my, and the thing that I just put into the chat in writing, lawyers in the group helped me out because, like, you know, I made a specific suggestion in writing, but I don't want to, like, let's say the board has a very, you know, like, for instance, a position of the board is that the city of New York exists, right? So I don't want to make it so tight that you can't say stuff on social media or in public that's like completely obvious that the board has that position. But I just think it really needs to, yeah. I had a general comment in writing because I doubted my own understanding of it. Jonathan made it very clear that it meant what I thought it meant, which I didn't like. And what I proposed in the chat is, I think, you know, what I would like the group to consider if they think it's okay.
So this would be a full
Unfortunately,
replacement for E.
yeah. Unfortunately, I
just
have
wanna ask
difficulty seeing the chat. So,
No,
sorry.
Nikki, will you read it out loud?
Yeah.
Sure. Any member making a public statement, including on social media, shall not claim to represent the board's position unless designated to do so by the board person or the board chairperson or the executive committee. So I just cut out all the stuff about disagreeing and specific bodies and stuff like that. And again, anyone, all this stuff is built on real experiences that either Sean or Alvin or other board members have lived. So I don't want to remove something that was helpful, but I actually think it's by broadening it, in many ways, this gives us more protection against people doing stuff like that. But the thing about disagreeing with the board is very odd to me, given the First Amendment. And First Amendment of the United States Constitution, not of everyone scrolling up on their bylaws.
That would that's one of those ambiguity things that can really come into play here. Thank you very much, Nikki. I mean, for what it's worth, I actually think that your wording, Nikki, actually does a good job of simplifying that whole section. I kind of like that. I know that, again, in context, there's always been a desire to maintain a certain sense of decorum, that the discussions related to board business happen within the board, and that there's a general discipline, if you will, which is really an awful term, I think, to use for a public body, but a discipline that any of those controversies happen within community board forums and don't happen outside of it. And I think that was the intention, was to prevent outside contention about internal board discussions. Now, that's the context there. With that said, I do believe that I personally never cared very much for that particular section, although it made sense to some extent. It's not atypical in private organizations, by the way. That's a very common member discipline requirement. You don't speak ill of the organization if you're a private member of like a club or another association, and you don't do that publicly and say that you're part of the association if you're going to do that. So, but I think that this particular proposed replacement for paragraph E, which I believe it's meant to replace the whole thing, I endorse the sentiment of the change, but I'm just one person. Any further discussion about the proposal on the table for section E? Let's see if there's any hands up.
If there are none, I'll weigh in when.
I had my hand up, Steve.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, John. First, I do like Nikki's wording. I have a question and a comment. The question is, the appearing for a governmental body, I'm assuming that was the designated person that's going in front of a particular body to represent the board. And is that saying that that person is therefore bound to only give the board's position? Is that what that was trying to say?
I do believe the implication would be that they would not be able to editorialize on the board position. You can't have a community board member representing the board at a city council hearing and they go, well, that's what the board said, but let me tell you what I think. that would be cause for removal for sure. The question is that particular scenario, does the wording address that?
Jonathan, can I jump? I'm sorry, may I jump in? I don't think that is what it says. I think that as long as you are clear that you are not at that city council hearing representing Community Board 14's position, but are there as the neighborhood association president here or a private citizen only, that you can go ahead and say what you think. I don't think that there's anything anathema to the First Amendment. This is just saying that you can't say that you are representing the community board's point of view unless you've been so designated by the chair. So I don't see, I think what you just said, what I heard was that you wouldn't be able to do that. And you certainly can, as long as you are clear that you are not representing the board.
Right, and I think to your point, it's in the scenario that someone who's a board member goes on behalf of the board to represent the board's position to that body, and then that person suddenly in mid testimony takes off the board hat, puts the individual private citizen hat, and muddles the position that they're supposed to represent with their personal views. That would be the conflicting part. That would be the troublesome part, I think. But I don't know if we have to hyper specify. Like if you're going to represent the board, then you know that you're representing the board entirely and not your own opinions. If you want to represent your own opinions, you are signing up to give testimony as Jane Smith of so-and-so, whatever group, or a private resident. You wouldn't be going as community board member on behalf of the board, but then also as private resident, probably. That I think that there is something to be said in that particular piece that should probably be clear for board members who might represent the board in different functions and capacities. I don't know. I just think that should be considered, but I'll leave it to everybody else's judgment if we need to change the wording to cover that.
And Jonathan, the second part of this is that, if I may, that what we're trying to regulate, we're trying to control is, and we have had very contentious times on this board, and the media and press will come to people, as well as you can certainly imagine me going to my synagogue when the synagogue wants to make an extension, and I say, well, I'm on the community board and I'm going to vote for that thing, or the community board is going to say, not a problem. I can't do that. Nobody could do that. Or when the press comes to say, what happened at the board meeting? Well, we were the board. I'm a community board member, and we're against that particular building or whatever it might be. You can't do that. That's what we're trying to say. Yes, you have the freedom of speech without question, but you don't have the freedom of speech to be representing the community board only as a person. So one has to be explicit in saying, all right, I'm a community board member, yes, but this is my own position, not the community board's. That's what we're trying to say.
Do we want to just add a sentence that says, in all other cases, the board member must specify that this is that any other views expressed are their own and not of the board? Do we want to put something like that in? Again, I don't know if I'm causing a problem here by over talking this point, but
Jonathan, I don't think whether it's not whether it's a conflict or not. It's that the person is not representing the board. He happens to be a community board member, but he's not representing the board.
Right. Thank you, Joe. Okay, go ahead, Glenn. I think you helped out.
I think that you're making this much too complicated in two ways. The original language covered all these bases. And now we're changing the language in a way that is trying to cover 10 more bases when generalized statements in the original language covered them all. Secondly, Steve, you have a tendency towards acting as if the people on the board are not that intelligent. So far, I've been on the board a long time, and everyone is very intelligent. When you say any member, everyone knows who we're talking about. We don't have to add board. When we say making a public statement, everyone understands that social media is public. We don't have to specify every little thing. We just need to make sure that the general statements cover the most contentious possible situations, which I think the original language did very well. I'm done. Thank you.
I don't take issue with the board member versus member, but I think I was, in looking at this, I did think we needed to be mindful of social media, and I did want to speak a little bit about that. But if other people have their hands up, we can discuss what we were just discussing rather than diving into that issue.
Do you see other hands up? Because for some reason I'm not seeing any hands up at this point. Maybe my wonderful WebEx experience is subpar.
Florencia has a hand up, and then there's a point in the chat from Ed Sen. I don't know, Steve, when you wanted, if you want that read aloud.
I can't see it, so it flashed on my screen, and now I can't see it anymore. So.
Let's see. Florencia, go ahead. But everyone, just give me a sec. I'm going to hop out and come back in because I'm having obviously a technical glitch. Give me 1 sec to be right back. But go ahead, Florencia.
Okay, I just wanted to say that the issue of social media really do need to be addressed because, social media and to think that we're moving into the future and really, folks are on different platforms on social media. And so as not to go out there to say that or even to imply that you could be representing the board or you're standing against the board or, whichever way. So yeah, I do believe that is something that needs to be addressed because social media is not going away. And the future, especially younger folks that are coming up, they're always on social media. So I think that needs to be said.
Okay. Do we, yeah, I agree. And I guess part of my concern and why I wanted to, at the very least, make social media explicit here is because I'm always concerned that, folks, if they say something on Facebook, about some issue of public interest that, even if they don't say like, oh, I'm, obviously, people are going to say what they're going to say on Facebook, and not, say, oh, by the way, I'm saying this in my individual capacity, and someone somewhere is going to misinterpret it as, couldn't in theory misinterpret it as something more official, knowing that they're a board member. I do think, we don't have to go overboard here in terms of like thinking through those scenarios. I think you're right, Florencia, that social media is, here and here to stay, and, something we have to be mindful of. But I think, if no one, from everything I've seen, I know a number of us and others are on Facebook and, post about, certain things of interest. But, I don't think there's been anything that's caused that has led to any need to police or expand some bylaw provision as to social media. I think just making clear that it's part of a public statement, because if you're in some Facebook, if you're speaking to your Facebook friends maybe, and you want to exclude that from being a public statement, I think saying no, if you're making a statement on social media, that's considered public. So I think with that specification, it's okay for me. But if anyone thinks that we do need to be more specific and police social media usage, obviously with the being compliant with the First Amendment, of course, I'm open to suggestions. But at least as far as I was concerned when reviewing this, I think just adding a reference to social media and just being otherwise leaving the section otherwise as we intend to deal with it would be okay. And of course I can't see hands, so.
I don't see any other hands right at this moment, but maybe what we could do is just read what the proposed wording would be right now.
Okay,
And
so
see like the final proposed version, and then let's see if there's any further comments on that.
So I think this is pretty consistent with what Nikki read. Any member making a public statement, including on social media, shall not claim to represent the board's position unless designated to do so by the chairperson or the executive committee.
Okay. Are there any further comments or concerns about the implications or anything else related to the section where we could enhance the wording to cover anything? Or does everyone feel that this is sufficient to address that concern of just making clear who gets to represent the board's official position publicly to anybody?
For those
Go
members,
ahead, Ann.
I raised my hand, but I don't think it was seen. For those members who don't have access to a screen, who are calling in, can you, going back to Glenn's point, can you read it before it was altered?
Sure.
Thank you.
So before it was altered, any member appearing before a governmental body or otherwise making a public statement which conflicts in any respect with positions adopted by the board shall not identify himself or herself as a member of the board when making such statement. No member shall represent the board's position before any city or other governmental agency or authority unless designated to do so by the board chairperson or the executive committee.
Is that sufficiently? Alvin, go ahead. I see your hand is up.
The historic origin of this provision was that this represented distrust of the methods of journalists. That journalists, when would solicit differing opinions from board members in an attempt to create the appearance of a controversy. I don't think the language addressed it as well as it should have. And it did raise serious questions about First Amendment rights. But controversy can be exploited by journalists, and certainly exploited by those who converse in public media and social media. And it was an effort to limit such exploitation. But I don't think it did it without causing First Amendment conflicts.
Thank you for sharing that, Alvin.
And Steve, just so you can't, because you can't see this chat, I'm just going to chime in that Deborah Valentin has put in the chat that she thinks the wording is sufficient. And I'll add and improved.
Okay. Was there? I know someone. I lost it in my chat now. I know that there was something that Ed was going to say by proxy of Nikki, I believe, or somebody else.
Ed has something in the chat for when we're done with this section, so I
Okay.
was waiting for that moment.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay.
Yes,
I didn't know if, okay.
I can speak to it afterwards. I am no longer indisposed.
Cool.
Okay, that's great. But it has nothing to do with this section, right?
It does not.
Okay, fine. Okay, all right. So is there any other questions about the proposed wording change to E before we move on? If you can raise your hand, that'd be great. And if not, move on. So I'm not seeing any hands raised. So in that event, we will go ahead with the proposed revised wording to E and move on to F, which I'm just going to jump the gun. I'm wondering if F is superfluous now, because we've mentioned that very same sentiment in our earlier amendment to, I believe, A in membership.
That was where I was heading. Should I?
Minds think alike, right?
I'll read F. Membership on the board shall, as much as is possible, have such diversity of interests as shall be representative of the community. And let me just pull up how we modified A, the end of A. The last sentence in A was the board supports the city charter's mandate that the borough president seek out persons with diverse backgrounds to promote diversity and inclusion. So yeah, I am on the same page that it seems like we've addressed diversity, the notion of diversity in 3A. We don't necessarily need it in 3F, but if someone feels, and 3F is diversity of interests, even so, I don't know if anyone wants to speak up in favor of a special mention of diversity of interest, but yeah, that's where I came out.
Okay. So Sean, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
It does seem like it's been addressed. And again, we don't appoint, you don't appoint yourselves. It's not the responsibility of the board to ensure that. It's the responsibility of the borough president. So I don't know that it belongs in the board's bylaws.
Thank you for that, Sean. So the proposal is just to strike F because it is redundant based on the changes we're proposing to the earlier part of this article. So if there are no additional proposals for it, and if there is no other discussion, we'll move on. But let's see, is there anyone who, oh, Ed, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to tack on something to the end of this. I'm just seeing this under this committees section, just regarding public membership. I'm just wondering if that warrants pulling up and including it into this section as opposed to it being hidden away in like a subsection regarding topical committees.
So you're talking about clarifying like what we should be looking for as a standard when it does come down to public members of committees?
Yeah, I think it warrants discussing or including in this section too, just helping those that are interested in potentially being a member, identifying that, oh, I can be a public member and here are the means of becoming a public member, and including in this section as opposed to it being buried under committees.
I hate to say it, Ed, and I really don't hate to say it, but that is an interesting point. The question is, does it really, it is a form of membership indirectly of the board. I just don't know if that would be the proper place definitionally to put it, is as treating it with the actual appointed board member conversation versus where it belongs, which is it is a committee function. You can't be a public member of the community board. You can only be a public member of a committee, I believe. I hope I'm not even getting that wrong. I'm just going to put that out there. Maybe a point here, but if it is only to committees, then maybe it does belong just in the committee section. That's all my commentary is.
And Jonathan, that's fair. I just wanted to bring this up, and I think it's worth having a discussion about as well. So thank you.
Of course, thank you. Any further I muted myself in the middle of that. Go ahead.
I do think, based on that observation, that it is worth keeping in references to board member. So just to distinguish it from public members. So even though maybe it was tedious on my part, I think that's a good reason to not conflate the public member and board member. Keep those as separate groups of people. But in terms of the substance, I guess I'm fine either way. This is about membership. I don't know if we want to just keep going, and maybe when we get there to the section about non-public, because the thing about non-public members is there is a process for them being included. But I think Ed's point is well taken, that when discussed in the committee section, it's only discussed in the context of serving on committees rather than, just generally public. But is there a way for public members to serve without being part of committees?
No, I don't believe so, Steve. I think it's committee specific. And so for the purposes of the bylaws, to mention committee membership before the topic of committees have come up might, just as you said, conflate the definitions of membership.
I concur. The section of the charter is very clear, because it even has its own paragraph in relation to the fact that the board may create committees. And then it says it may include persons with a residence or significant interest in the community who are not members of the board. And it does say that every committee, though, must have a board member as a chair. So it really is very specific to committees. So maybe the sentiment could be saved for when we get to committees to say that we should be soliciting, I'm just throwing it out there, soliciting intentionally to ensure diversity of interests on committees where public members are appointed, something to that effect.
Yeah, when we get there, for sure. Because I do value Ed's impulse on this. And so maybe highlighting it better when we get to that section, but I do think it's section specific. And I'm talking over the fact that Florencia has a hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Florencia. Thank you, Sean. Florencia, is your hand up on purpose? Okay, good.
But I said that both you and Sean really addressed it, and I was going to say just what you were saying.
Thank you very much, Florencia. We appreciate it.
No, I thank you for saying it so gracefully. Thank you.
Of course. Okay. So the proposal still is just to strike this section from membership because we already included it in an earlier paragraph. If there are no further discussion and objections to that, we will move on to Article 4. Hearing none. All right, I think we're good to go. Okay, so this has to do with elections. That's what this whole article is about. Again, and just just as a quick reminder, we're 29 minutes from our scheduled end time. And again, I want to emphasize the general principle of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So other than any editorial typographical consistency corrections, which I full confidence Steve is on top of all of them that need to be made, you know, we should be judicious about engaging with the sections if and only if there's a substantial problem that needs the attention, versus if it's been working well and there really isn't a problem, then maybe we should, you know, save the discussion for topics that do require that. Anyway, I'm just going to put that reminder out there, and we will continue as planned. So for section A, any proposals?
Can I
Oh, you want to read it?
well, I'm gonna suggest something, just having looked at section 4. Section 4 like dives into like nominating committee and is very like, I don't know, it just like, I don't know if inside baseball is the right term, but it just kind of like gets really into like nitty gritty of elections of officers. And my thought, and looking at this earlier today, is maybe it might make sense to flip 4 and 5, notwithstanding the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality, because I feel like the outlining who the officers are, what they do, their terms and all that is just a simpler and better overview structure rather than diving into this whole election nitty gritty. At least that was the impression at least that was the idea I had. I don't know if we need to resolve something like that now. Maybe we could just like start going through and, you know, revisit it once we're done dealing with the individual sections. But that was one broad overview point I wanted to make. Another point for this section is, given that we should keep in mind that the elections are being held virtually, so we should just, you know, modify language accordingly. And in that regard, there's a lot of reference to nominations from the floor and things like that. So when I was editing, I was generally removing references from the floor because that seemed like more of a in-person kind of term, although maybe, you know, it's understood to be what it means in the virtual setting as well. But that was another point that came up in some of these sections. Yeah, I think one other point that is lower in the section is whether we should better define eligibility for election. I think that's something to consider. So those were just some general overview points I wanted to raise before we dove in.
Thank you, Steve. I see a couple of hands up. I'm going to go with Glenn, then Sean, and then Florencia. Unless, Sean, you just want to jump in if it's a really important priority thing.
No, actually, I want to demonstrate I can wait my turn.
Okay, very good. Okay, just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else. Okay, go ahead, Glenn.
I just want to simply state, God willing, COVID is not going to be with us forever. So let us not change language that is specifically suitable to the present situation where we're operating by WebEx, and leave it as a more generalized statements that will also work when we get back to actually meeting in person. So to say nominations from the floor is perfectly fine, because everyone in one of these virtual meetings knows exactly what that means. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Glenn. For what it's worth, I concur. I think from the floor works virtually or in person. So I think as long as we make it clear that that's the option that they have, I think it works. Florencia, go ahead.
Wanted to say, rather than remove that the narrative that says that, to include narrative that will suggest that if it should there be the need to do a virtual voting, that that can be included. So instead of removing from the floor, that, you know, anyway, that was just my suggestion. Let me hear what Sean has to say.
That's a good point, Florencia, too, that maybe if we ever find ourselves in this situation, or if we hybridize at any point, maybe if there is something that we want to say about a virtual circumstance, that's good to consider, but we would probably have to think out specifically what that should be. But thank you for sharing that. Sean, go ahead.
Okay. I agree that from the floor is a term of art, and Florencia's and or approach probably is most useful going forward. I have a, it might be broken, we should consider fixing it, which is the actual process of selecting a nominating committee from the 4 regions. And I'm sorry, I should have maybe made sure we had a regional map, but the population of this board isn't equally divided from the 4 regions. So in regions down south where we have only 3 or 4 community board members in that specific region, and maybe one of them is already an executive committee member, is not eligible, and heaven forbid, or not heaven forbid, and in the circumstance that another one has expressed interest in running for the office, then you only have 2 members of the board to select from. So we've had in region, I forget which ones are which, but I think in region 1, where we have the longest list of board members, you try to mix up who's on the board and give different people an opportunity. But in regions where there's only 4, I really have, you know, there only maybe 2 people to toggle back and forth between in regions 3 and region 4. So I don't, and I don't know the origin of ensuring the regional representation, and maybe it is important, and that's just a fact that we accept, but it does make the dynamic different in terms of who has the opportunity to serve on the nominating committee from region to region, year to year.
Thank you for that, Sean, and I thank you for opening up a can of worms that because I have had issues with this regional committee structure because it is ancient. It was designed to ensure diversity because the district definitely had a whole different demographic pattern going back to the 70s, 80s. And I'm assuming at least back then the regional committee structure and logic of the quadrants was in place at least for that long. There is a massive amount of change. And I believe that this was an attempt to, without doing so in any explicit way, make sure that people who were tended to be of one background, race, ethnicity, religion, and that tended to concentrate in one area, that all the people who were concentrated in different areas and pockets of the district would get to have a say. Obviously, population density has changed. The demographics have changed. If you look at the police precinct sectors, those have changed over the years for a variety of reasons. So there is a can of worms here about if we do hew the nominating committee structure and the regional committee logic together and try to make those things work together in a way that's relevant to 2021 and not 1980, Community Board 14, we may have to consider also revising the way we structure the regional committees themselves, and honestly consider what their real function should be, as we don't really use regional committees for anything at this point that the bylaws specify, except for the nominating committee. The regional committee is almost never really invoked in public hearings or land use issues quite in that formal way. And so, and there are reasons for that. I won't get into that now, but it brings up the broader, I think, point of, are the regional committees structured properly? Do they continue to serve a meaningful purpose? Should they be rethought entirely? And then therefore, what would happen to the nominating committee structure? It's a big issue, I think.
So for the purposes of the nominating committee, then would the board members want to just say what the regional committees was meant to achieve, which is simply the nominating committee shall be selected from, shall represent the demographic and regional, or the demographic and geographic diversity of the district, providing maximizing the opportunities for all to participate, or something like that, to suggest that you try to rotate who's on that committee from year to year.
I'm just going to add one thing before I open it up to other board members who have their hands up. But I think the only issue with that is that this section right now might be easier to enforce to ensure the diversity, whereas that is a general principle that would be unenforceable in spirit, because if someone just chooses not to, or we'd have to come up with another structure possibly. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I do think this current way of structuring the nominating committee by the regional committee diversity is like, well, are you in that committee area or not? And that's a very easy way to ensure that diversity. But with that said,
it doesn't though, Jonathan. It actually limits diversity. If two out of 4 regions aren't as diverse as the other 2 regions, but they have to be represented. I mean, I could say it very plainly that the opportunities for white males who don't live in region 3 or 4 to serve on the nominating committee is limited.
right, that's why I'm saying I agree with you. I totally agree with you on that. And I just don't think we should revisit this without revisiting the regional committee logic and structure as well, because for the same reason, the regional committees and what land use items come up and how we divvy that out to make sure the voices that are affected are heard properly. I mean, a lot has changed since we started that structure. But I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to go make sure I'm recognizing all of our wonderful committee members here. I got Glenn, Nikki, and Shahid. So we'll go with Glenn first.
I think that some made that were valid. And the simple solution is just to add at least one member from each region where practicable, allowing a little bit of flexibility when needed, but not to assume that future boards are going to automatically work towards diversity because other boards don't. So I like keeping something in here that requires some level of diversity, or at least of region, but giving a little bit of leeway to the people who are choosing. So where practicable, I think solves that problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Nikki, go ahead.
I think that's a good suggestion from Glenn if you think it would be enforceable. My question was like, I know there's sort of a rule of thumb for how before the pandemic, when we all got to see each other in real life, there was a rule of thumb for where the meeting physically had to take place, right? You had to flip back and forth between 2 physical regions of the community. So I'm just wondering if instead of using the regional committee thing, which seems to be a little out of date, if that could just be a rule of thumb, which sort of broadens it up. I don't know. I was just trying to think of any other organizing principle that would ensure diversity, but that isn't out of date.
Can you just clarify that? I didn't quite understand what.
Sean, tell me if I'm wrong or someone else knows. Isn't there some sort of rule? There's a reason that the meeting is in a different place each month. So couldn't we just replace the regional committee language? What is it? Sorry, I'm like incapable of finding words on a screen right now.
Nikki, I think the meeting is supposed to travel between the 4 quadrants as well, and then we don't really do that. We kind of address it by putting it on the border between 2. So I don't know how helpful or applicable using that language is.
Okay, then ignore me. I don't know why I thought that there was some other way of slicing the pie that might have been a little bit more equitable, but I'm wrong.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. Shahid, go ahead.
Yes, because now we are talking about the bylaws things and how Sean explained the geographical and diversity things, and Glenn add with some sort of regional committees. So I think it is a good idea if we able to increase our executive council, like if we have member at large, we have 2 member of large. So if we add 2 more, so every region have a representation. So how we also combat the deficiency of all other regions. I don't know what is the four regions and what is the how they are divided into four regions. But if we also add in executive council member at large, regional committee 1, regional committee 2, so maybe we able to have some more effective work in our district community board 14.
Thank you for that comment. That's an interesting proposal to consider, having some additional discretionary nominating committee members as maybe a solution. That's an interesting concept. I think there's a lot of confusion about this regional committee, and I understand it. I mean, since 2003, I've been on the board, and I don't think I've ever really seen the regional committee logic invoked in any formal way. And I don't know how long that was going on prior to 2003, but that may have happened. And I do think I know why, because that had a lot to do with public hearings on land use issues. And because there may not have been enough members of the community board to achieve quorum for the public hearings, the practice was, well, as long as you're a board member, and it may be for a particular area of the district, but as long as you're a board member and you come to the public hearing, we get quorum more easily, and then we satisfy that requirement. But as a result, then it was like, well, it might be impossible to always get quorum for the public hearing for that area. So then it just became open to all the board members to make sure we had enough people to legitimately conduct the public hearing. So I think that was the trap of the regional committee problem. That's why they've kind of gotten erased in our practice. That's my insight on that from what I've observed. So this is a complicated issue. So I'm just going to put it that way. It's a complicated issue, and I don't think we can make a competent determination about the nominating committee if unless we just say we're going to make it completely and totally unrelated to the regional committees. That would be only, I think we have to probably give this more thought than we're going to be able to do in the next 12 minutes. Unless you all want to keep going, but that's up to you to decide, a majority of you. But I think we just need to consider that these are intertwined and complicated, and I don't think many of you understand where the boundaries are. I could tell you, I think it's basically where the LIRR tracks are. It's a quadrant, LIRR tracks, and then I believe it's divided by, I want to say the Q line, but I could be wrong. No, Ocean Avenue. So it creates a quadrant in in 4/4 of the district, from the like Avenue H basically across all the way through, and then down the line by Ocean Avenue. I'm just going to double check that I'm correct on that. And that's how the quadrants are structured.
Caton Avenue?
It is Ocean Avenue from north to south is the middle. And then across from the Long Island Railroad tracks, the almost defunct tracks where there's only a couple of freight trains every now and then, basically like Avenue H, that cuts across. So Ocean Avenue down the middle, and the tracks across, and then you get your 4 quadrants. And that's how the regional committees are structured. And that's why it's so disproportional in terms of how many people serve on each, because the special permit district in the southeast part of the community district, that's very low density. There's not as many people as living in the northeast part of the district, and that's a big part of it. I know this might be hard to understand for me talking, but if you didn't already know that, that's how it's structured, and maybe that's probably why we should. I'm just going to suggest maybe we don't touch this issue right now, and we give it time for our next meeting to think it over and understand it better to come up with a solution. That's just my idea. I'm going to stop talking now and see who else has their hand raised. Or Steve, if you have anything you want to.
No, not at this time. If anyone has their hand raised, that's fine. We also haven't like read out the provision yet. You know, we've and you know that's partially my fault for setting up like an overview of ideas. But you know, if we wanted to get to that, or you know, or if we want to keep talking about this region issue, that's fine too.
Okay, Glenn, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment that having the rezoning of most of Community Board 14, the neighborhoods do vary quite a bit in a number of different ways. So to use this generalized goal of at least one person from each different type of neighborhood, so to speak, that we're now calling regional, the quadrants, I don't think is a bad idea. But since, as Sean pointed out, it isn't always something that can be easily done, that's why I suggested adding when practicable. But as a goal, I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Any other hands up for any further proposals to consider here? Shahid, did you want to speak again? I see your hand up, or is that from before? Okay, great. Okay, so, Steve, why don't we start putting in with the 8 minutes we have left, what is the simpler ones of your proposals for us to put in, so we can at least start tracking that.
All right, well,
yeah.
let me just quickly read it out, just so you know. I don't know if there's anyone still on the phone anyway, but just so we're all on the same page as everything this provides, because we've only really addressed the first two sentences. So section 4A, except as hereinafter set forth at the board's regular meeting in the month of January, the chair shall appoint a nominating committee consisting of 5 members. There shall be at least 1 member from each region. The committee shall elect its own chair. Such committee shall meet as often as is necessary thereafter in order to report to the board at its February meeting 1 candidate for each of the offices of chairperson, 3 vice chairperson, parentheses, first vice chairperson, second vice chairperson, third vice chairperson, secretary, and 2 members at large. Members of the board may offer additional nominations from the floor at the February meeting. All nominees must have served on the board for the entirety of the preceding year. So let's go to markup. All right, some of this we can probably. So in terms of substance beyond the region issue, I guess, as I was alluding to, well, I'll restore from the floor because we discussed that. I guess I was wondering if we should add more conditions for eligibility for the nominees. I was thinking, my proposal was that the nominees accept their nomination, intend on serving on the board the following year, have served on the board for the entirety of the preceding year, and also that they not be term limited, although that might be obvious, but hopefully we wouldn't nominate someone who's term limited for the following term. So those are some ideas. At the very least, I thought making sure that the nominee is going to accept the nomination would be. I think that seems to be what the practice is. So if that's a norm and we don't need it specified in the bylaws, that's fine. If the only eligibility for the nomination we want is that they've served on the board for the entirety of the preceding year, that's fine too. Thanks.
So parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order, which is included in here. I mean, normally you have to accept the nomination. If you decline it, then it's going to be vacant. So, so I don't think we have to spell that out. And then the term limited part. Here's another little can of worms, smaller than the other one. But when it comes to the term limit issue, there is also the issue of appointment. We have our elections prior to knowing what the borough president is going to do in terms of appointment. So we don't actually verify that the person is going to be able to fulfill, like a person could be nominated for chair or for any of the other positions, and their term may be expiring in that spring, and it would be a contingent that the borough president appoints them. So I'm sure that the nominating committee does vet that. I'm sure in the past, not that we've had that much turnover for the executive committee, but I'm sure that does get factored in whether or not their term is going to expire, and maybe considering that. But that is one thing. But again, I don't know if it's a real problem to fix. I'm not sure there's a problem there. But I did want to just bring that point up. Any hands up about what Steve has said so far? Glenn, is that your hand up again? Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I've sat in on quite a few committees over the years, and whenever anyone is suggesting nominating someone, if there's any question as to whether they'll accept, they call them and make sure that they will accept before actually nominating them. And then in the February meeting, anyone who is nominated from the floor obviously is also aware of that. So, you know, you don't have to add all this stuff. This stuff is all obvious, and it's just that they have to be been on the board for a year, which was the original language was just fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Joanne has a hand
Joanne.
up.
Yes, I see. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead, Joanne.
So it did come up in the borough board meeting today that those new members who will be joining us this appointment year are the ones who are subject to term limiting, or that's when it's going to start. It wasn't clarified whether people that are already on the board are subject to it, but there, Sean can advise us to that. But I do think, my point being, we should have some mechanism, since this is a new aspect of the charter and was voted on by the citizens of New York City. We should make some mechanism. I should know that I am not term limited before I accept a nomination. You should know the same. Whether we're going to be reappointed in May and have been nominated, that's a whole nother story. That's the tricky part, but I do think we need to have some language about term limits, because you have to know that you're going to be able to serve for 2 years.
Well, on that point though, Joanne, the officer term is 1 year. So maybe just clarifying that their term will not expire in that year, that they have the additional year left where they could fulfill their obligations until elections happen again. Maybe
Right.
that's the part, because even if they get term limited, if they still have that 1 year left and they're in their 4th term, it won't be a problem.
Right. So my point being, however we decide to address it, I think out of respect that it exists now for board members where it didn't exist before when these were written, when these were revised in 2015, I think that we should address it.
Thank you very much, Joanne. We are 2 minutes from our appointed conclusion time. We, of course, can decide that we want to keep going on, or we could decide how we want to make a note of where we are now, and then
We can't, I'm sorry, but we can't keep going on because I have staff time limits that I still have to staff the
fine.
office this week.
Sure. Oh no, I you know, in the good old days, it would have not
I mean,
necessarily been.
it's not me, but I do have to excuse
Sure.
the staff on time tonight.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, at this point, unless there's an objection, maybe we just figure out what our next steps are for the next meeting, and go with that. Steve, what are your thoughts?
We will conclude 4A, and I think, I mean, the problem, I think 6 is going to be a doozy, so we might not get through 6 at the next meeting. Is my feeling. 6 is long. That's all about committees, and we also, Joanne mentioned the idea of adding a new committee. So, and we also broached the topic of highlighting more about public non-board members. So we have some issues to address there.
Agreed. Our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, April 27th, 6:30 by WebEx. I think we've hit a point where I cannot emphasize enough how important it is by the time we get there, that I think whatever really needs to be addressed, we have to have it in writing already. So please, for all those committee members that have strong feelings about any of these sections and really think they need reform or modification, please, 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 I think it will help tremendously if you could email it to Sean in the office, whatever your proposals are, so that way that gives Steve and myself the time to review and incorporate it so we can have the discussion more efficiently. I think that'll be very, very, very helpful. It will not preclude our ability to discuss line by line like we're doing now, but if you definitely have a clear idea of what you want changed, I think it would help tremendously for everyone to email the board office and get it to us probably as close to April 20th or 21st, so that way we have time to review and prepare. I think that would be tremendously helpful. So please consider doing that if you have strong feelings about any of the other sections that we're going to be looking at next. So that's my piece on that. Steve, anybody else have anything you want to add?
And I'll do my best to circulate a proposed round of, basically getting us through 6. And, if there are additional edits or comments that come through after, I'll certainly incorporate those and recirculate.
Terrific. All right. If there are no objections, the automatic motion to adjourn is on the table. Hearing no objections, we will reconvene Tuesday, April 27th, 6:30 p.m. at the WebEx link to be distributed. Thank you, everybody, for your effort tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Night, Alan.
Good night, Florencia.